ready to lose millions? Most business owners are, without even realizing it, when they try to sell their business. Here's the thing, you spent years, maybe decades, building your business. You've put in the late nights, the risks, the sacrifice, but when it comes time to sell, the reality is most owners leave serious money on the table. Why? Because they think they're ready. But buyers don't just buy revenue or profits, they buy a business that is prepared, documented, and positioned to run without you. And that's where most deals fall apart. I've seen it happen too many times. Owners think the business is worth X, but once a buyer takes a closer look at customer concentration, at financial reporting, or even leadership transition, the number drops fast. What feels like a fair deal suddenly turns into disappointment, and that's where millions disappear. Today's guest is here to pull back the curtain on the process. Think of it like staging your business the way you stage a house before putting it on the market. We talk about the blind spots most owners miss, how to avoid common deal killers, and how to position your company to buyers so it maximizes value. So if you ever search on Google, how do I sell my business? What do buyers look for? Or how do I maximize my exit? This episode is for you. And if you find yourself in that situation where you need help, click the link below in the description and schedule a time to have a conversation. Let's get to it. Here's my conversation with John Bly.
Today's guest is John Bly, a tax partner and South Atlantic regional leader of Aprio. And John and I go back many, many years before we get into this talk about succession. John recruited me to PwC 20 plus years ago. When I met John, I was working with his wife, Darcy, at Grant Thornton. And I think, John, your signing bonus for bringing me on, I think parlayed into a pool table. I'm not sure if that was accurate or not, but I think you mentioned that to me. He's like, hey, Tom, this is the pool table. Thank you very much for the signing bonus. I think that's a true story. I don't know.
It is. It's true. It's so funny. We were young bucks.
Yeah, we're young and dumb back then, for sure. Really wanted to jump in and bring John aboard because I think people would benefit from John's experience of helping clients on the buy side as well as the sell side, which is really important in terms of today's conversation about succession. But what's unique about John and his wife, Darcy, and what they have done to parlay acquisition upon acquisitions through this M&A structure and actually doing it himself and living through that process, I think is that emotional piece is something key that viewers can kind of learn from John's experience. So John, I'll get out of the way and just help the audience understand kind of like why the M&A world for you has been a integral part of your practice, professionally as well as personally.
Yeah, it's funny, Tommy, back when we knew each other at PwC, it's been 20 plus years. It started with, I didn't even know that much about M&A. It wasn't anything that was in my background. I didn't spend any time on it really at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And it was just in the core tax group, but literally the back of a Journal of Accountancy magazine got me thinking. And that was about 21 years ago, call it the sometime in 2004. Because in the back of the Journal of Accountancy, it talked about CPA firm for sale. And, having been at the Big Four and you were at Grant and a great local firm before that, at the Big Four, they really only talk about a handful of other firms. They don't even know the names of these other firms. So I certainly didn't know you could buy a small CPA firm. Like, that seems crazy. I didn't even know that was a thing. And that was really the start of what was Bly and Bly in 2004 and 5 was, a couple of really tiny solo practitioners, no employees, almost like a book of business acquisitions in 2004 and 2005, as we did 3 of those in like a 13-month period in 2004 and 5.
Yeah. So how was that emotion of like leaving the corporate world, right? That steady paycheck, as they say, to jump into buying someone else's book, which you have no idea what you're buying, right? It sounds great. Diligence always looks good. But once you've kind of taken the keys of this new venture, like what goes through the emotion of that process of just talking to someone, diligence, and just really ultimately pulling the trigger on the financing?
Yeah, I think part of it was I was super young, right? So like I've done a bunch of deals now, north of 40 transactions over the last 21 years, along with hundreds we've advised on. And I would think I was so young at the time that I didn't have a ton of emotions. We didn't have kids yet. It was just before we had kids. It was a couple years before them. And I knew that I was reasonably smart, but I was also willing to work crazy hard. And so was my wife. And so we were going to attack, right? Like it was just obvious. And then on like day one, we're like, what is QuickBooks? Like PricewaterhouseCoopers doesn't use QuickBooks. I never heard of such a thing, right? And that is the staple of the majority of small business owners, financial background. And so, I think it was a little bit of nerves, but mostly determination and grit and like, we're going to run through walls, right? I mean, it was a crazy amount of work, leaving the big four and doing this. There was a little unease to your comment about leaving a paycheck. It wasn't terror or fear. It was more like, well, I better get out on the streets and pick up some new clients. We got to pay the bills sort of thing. So it was more like a motivator, if that makes sense, than it was a fear. And I think part of that is because I was so young.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you were buying those practices early on, right, the seller, right, those CPAs that were selling to you, like what was going through their heads in terms of seeing it from that perspective, right? You were buying this book because you found that growing through acquisitions was probably more efficient use of your time versus trying to go out there and knock on doors, advertise and whatnot. But tell us about the conversations with the seller, like on those early days.
Yeah, so between 2004 and the end of 2006, we did 5 transactions and grew from 0 in revenue and had full-time jobs to, by the end of '06, we were about 1.5 million. So, like a quick ramp up. It was actually like 26 or 27 months to do 5 deals. And the sellers were a variety. We had one seller who was definitely retiring, one seller who was going to go do M&A. Actually, they had seen their clients sell a few times, and they decided they wanted to get into the M&A world because that was, quote unquote, better money, easy money. Everybody always thinks that the grass is always greener, Tommy, right? And then we had one that was retiring really early, like in their late 40s. They ended up taking 6 or 7 years off and going back and doing something different. But and then one left. They were building 2 different businesses, and one left this business to us and did a different business. So, but all of them. There was some who it was super transactional. There was others. There was at least 3 of the 5 who it was emotional. These were my babies in air quotes, right? These were my clients. These are the things that I built. They knew they wanted to do it. They didn't have second thoughts, but they definitely were focused on making sure, especially in a professional services world, that their clients landed in a good spot, that we knew as much as we possibly could about those clients, that they could do introductions, we could meet in person, that we would do everything we could to serve the clients the same way they served them. And that was really the emotions they felt more than anything. It wasn't regret. It was like, are they going to take care of these clients as much as I care about them?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely a big feeling that, business owners have, even with my own practice, is that when I take on a client, what is the succession if something happens to me with that client? Are we going to go down this path where they're so dependent on the work that I do that if I get hit by the proverbial bus, are they left on the streets? And so again, that's always run through my mind is like, how do we make sure the clients get served, right? And so let's kind of push into that a little bit. So on when you advise clients right now, you're looking at from a service perspective, and you're advising sellers, right? Walk us through kind of that initial conversation you have with them, like understanding what their mindset is. Are they willing to, again, ultimately seal the deal because this baby that they've created over how many ever years is such an emotional piece? Like, help us understand, are they prepared for succession? Are they prepared for making sure the business is in the right place to be built, sold? Or is that something that is a service that you guys really look at offering to help businesses start that process of a transition?
Yeah, I'd say sort of a couple buckets there. One is they're preparing 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. Those people are generally the type of people who are more likely to be prepared. Not always, both emotionally and financially, right? But more likely. But so maybe that's 60 or 70% likely they're ready when it actually is time. And then there's the other ones who wake up. I say all the time, they wake up sometime after a family vacation. It's either after July 4th or after the Christmas, New Year, Hanukkah, sort of time frame. And they're like, I don't want to do this anymore, because maybe they just had 7 or 10 days with their family and they realized they've been missing something, or maybe they had a good discussion with a family member that they decided it was time to sell, or whatever those things are that go through people's heads. Those people made that decision in the moment, in that like 10-day period. And then when they actually start to go through the sale process, it's really emotional. And I would say part of what I have learned over the years is, for sure, when that first phone call comes, this is not they've signed an LOI. This is before that. I don't usually end up finding out they signed an LOI without having some discussion ahead of time. I usually tell them, like, look, this is going to be a longer process than you think. It's going to be your day job plus this, right? Like, you're not like going to stop serving clients or stop selling landscaping or stop, laying construction, whatever the things are you do in your day-to-day 30 to 80-hour work week. This is in addition. So are you ready for the actual extra effort and work that goes into a sale process? Because you can't, like, if Tommy wants to buy your business and he provides an LOI, you can't be like 3 weeks before you get back to him. That's not an option, right? It's got to be a top priority, but you can't stop serving clients or doing the things you were doing with your leadership team either, because then the business falls apart. So it's a both. So I coach them around that. And then I also tell them, are you sure you're ready? Like, have you thought about what you're going to do the next 5 years? Have you talked with, if you have a significant other, have you talked to them? If you have kids, have you talked to them? Like, are you sure you understand, like, emotionally, you've built this business? The ones who have bought a business, Tommy, and they've only been at it 2 or 3 years and they've grown it like crazy and they're ready to sell, I don't see that as the issue. It's the ones who literally started it from scratch and have owned it for 20 years or more that have this emotional, like, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And so I coach them, like, look, are you really sure? And we talk through the conversations, and I'll give them like real life examples of, friends, right? I don't use client names, but I'll use all sorts of friends of mine who have gone through it and the emotions they dealt with.
Yeah, no, that's key, because I think people look at this world, and the clients that we advise are usually high net worth individuals, and it's beyond the numbers, right? It's beyond the quantitative thing. It's getting to that qualitative emotion and I think deep down feelings that they've known have been there, but just don't recognize it. And I think it's that fear of, like, what's next? What do I do now when I've spent all these years building something, it's my baby, and then I don't know what to do on the other side. And I think when talk about succession, the world I am with the family offices, we look at succession in kind of multiple buckets, right? There's someone who's growing a business, looking to exit a business, either to a strategic, to an investor, or I would say internal to maybe management taken over, maybe an ESOP or some type of structure. But another part is, transitioning to a family through a trust, right? And so understanding what the goals are of the patriarch and matriarch who created the wealth and created the business, it's really is like, here are the different avenues you can take. How involved is your family? How involved is your executives? Is it just better just to outright sell? Is that better for your customers? Because if they're now into this bigger platform that have more offerings that are, you're limited because of your size, but if you get into maybe an institutional buyer that provides more, then that's better for the client because they're getting more access to services that helps their lives. And so when you look at the individuals that are ready to make a transaction or sell, whatever, like, have they gone through the process of looking at the owner extracted themselves and saying, here is the next generation of leaders? Have they gone to that detail?
Yeah. So I'll come to that. I do want to add one comment, which is, you talk about the emotional side and what you were talking about with the leadership team and things. And like one of the things I coach them on is, if they're going to sell to somebody and it's not internal, Are they going to be the platform? Are they selling to a competitor? Are they selling to Tommy and John who are starting from scratch? Whatever. And are they staying on? And if they're going to stay on, are they the ultimate decision maker still, or are they not? And how are they going to feel about reporting to someone, whether it's a board of directors or whether it's me or you, Tommy, or whatever? Because that is another piece of the emotional toll that they don't think about. So the leadership team, I think it's a mixed bag, big time on that. We have some founders or people who have bought businesses who their sole focus is to get themselves out of operations or to get themselves to a level where they have a management level team. And we have others who have grown significant businesses, and they're willing to get in the weeds on every decision, and they're willing to get really deep and go really deep on small decisions, and they don't care. And so they don't really care that much about a leadership team and developing people and doing those sorts of things. And so it varies based on the individual business. It's less to do about size, because I've seen some $2 and $3 and $4 and $5 million businesses with great leadership teams, and I've seen some $75 and $100 million businesses where the owner founder is still spending a significant amount of time in the business, like at the granular level, and working crazy amounts of hours.
So John, let's just dive in a little bit more on the business side, people who are actually serious about going down a transaction and talking about internal workings and the kind of coaching you do to business owners when they look at this type of, I would say, milestone in their career.
Yeah, I think it's, so then when we talk about the emotional, we talk about the leadership size, right? Now the thing is they're in an LOI, they're in a process. What I find is that sometimes, depending on the owner, they get stuck on these small things, right? So it's a $10 million transaction, a $5 million transaction, or in a case that I'm working through right now, $100+ million transaction. And they're getting nervous over $100,000 decisions. I'm like, guys, we got to take the bigger, I mean, like if the deal changes from 110 million to 105 million, you're still going to have lifetime generational wealth, like the way it's set up, all the trust planning we did, et cetera. We can't be worried about the fact that they're arguing on working capital over $100,000. And so there's this emotional thing sometimes with entrepreneurs who feel like they have to win on every sort of transaction.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because I've seen that too with my clients, where regardless of the size of a deal, if it's a $500,000 deal, if it's, tens of millions or hundreds, they get so fixated on, to your point, wanting to win. And the conversation and part of that coaching is, you're going to have these things pop up in your favor or against you, right? And so if we think about going into this process of, this is what we're trying to accomplish, to your point, all this is rounding errors, and we want to be sensitive to people and what they're going through. But as advisors, we have to sit here and say, all right, like even an LOI, right? People might not know what a letter of intent. That just doesn't mean that you're binding or you're selling anything, but that's just someone's initial offer to buy your business. And so when they throw out a number in that LOI and a certain time frame and all the things that they put in there, don't get offended. That's just part of the process. And as you get deeper, everyone's always looking to squeeze people out here and there. And so that's key, is understanding your business, understanding the goal you set prior to even starting this, and sticking to that, because it does get emotional. So help us understand, like, when owners go down this process and they start talking to their executive team and there's initial conversations, I'm assuming that, I won't assume, I've seen it. Anytime there's change, good or bad, people freak out. And so help us understand how a owner of a business, who is usually, it's a more of a family environment when it comes to these types of businesses, breaks that news to the executive team saying, this is what I'm thinking. Like, help us understand that process.
Yeah, that depends on how open the person is in their leadership style. We have some who are very open and transparent, and they've said, hey, look, it could be 2025, and they're running EOS, the traction model, and their plan all along has been to sell in 2030, let's say, right? So nobody's surprised in that case, because they've heard it the whole time, and so nobody's nervous, whatever. Or maybe they're nervous a little bit, but they're not as nervous as they are when they find out about it, like at the closing table. So that management style, leadership style is one. The one that is more common is the one that is not. And it's, that they're open with their leadership team, but maybe not that open with their leadership team. And it's easier when the person's 65 or 70 and they're thinking about selling, because it's more obvious. The management team's probably been thinking about it anyway, so it's not a surprise. It's more challenging when the person's 45 to 55 and they're going to sell, because maybe they're not, maybe they haven't thought about that. Maybe they thought it was going to be 60 or 65 or 70 when the person sold. Then it's really about having a small group conversation and one-on-ones afterwards. And we talk about the fact that they have to make sure that they know who they're going to sell to, maybe not the individual seller, but that they're going to have an idea if they're going to have roles or not, how they're going to play in that, what they're going to do to incentivize, if they're going to do anything to incentivize. Like, are they going to have some sort of stay-on bonus? Are they going to have some performance metrics? Are they going to tie the earnout to the leadership team? I mean, all those sorts of things are things they should have some general idea before they sit down with the management team, because I think that helps get rid of a lot of the angst and fear in the management team.
Yeah. And so you're hitting on some key points here where these are more strategic, and understanding who that potential buyer is going to inform the owner on how to have this conversation. So let's role play here. So if I'm selling to you, right, and you're a strategic buyer that I have an accounting practice I'm looking to sell, you're a machine that has processes, and there's going to be a lot of overlap, right? And so if we go into this conversations and saying, hey, Janie, hey, you're a great tax person, great bookkeeper, like, what's going to happen is I need you to help me through this transaction, but there's a likely chance that you might not have a job in 2 years because of you're working towards getting yourself out of a job just because of the transaction. And so for you to stay on to help me get through that process, I will pay you, plus there's a bonus, right? And so when people understand that and is clear, regardless if they've known that you're looking to sell a business or if this is kind of news to them, people will help you, because that's what their nature is. They want to help you through a process, but you also have to almost take care of them too, because again, I've been in situations where I'm working myself out of a job intentionally, and I know that going in, and I'm okay with it because there's incentives involved, right? And so owners, I think, have to think about individuals have helped them grow this business and help them through this transaction, because what I've seen is people take a approach where, no, it's my money and you're just expected to work to a period of time that might not be beneficial for you, but it's beneficial for me. And people quit. And people are like, well, how do they quit? This is a great opportunity. Well, who's it for, right? And so there's value lost, I think, in values of businesses when you don't have clear succession of how this process is going to work, what everyone's roles are, where are the gaps, right? And have you seen it where if you're selling to a strategic or maybe to an investor, that maybe the successor of running the operations is not inside the building currently? Like, have you seen that, and has that been something that have been a challenge for owners as they look at selling their business to maybe an investor?
So the new CEO or COO is not inside the current business, right? We have seen that a lot, and I think it is, to your point, it is to align incentives to be equal, so that if you're here, if my incentives as the seller are to maximize the earnout, whatever that looks like, and that's a 24-month or a 36-month or whatever it is, or there's some clean transition and we retain 95% of the clients or the same revenue or whatever, then I have to align my incentives with whoever is driving that, whether that's the head of sales or whether that's the COO or whatever those titles might be at the particular business, because every business is different in who serves the clients and who's the key people, and definitely tying them to that earnout, and getting them their normal salary, but then a significant number on the back end that helps them feel good about that alignment is key. I think when the owner is getting replaced and there's a new CEO or a new leader coming in place, there's definitely more nerves from the management team. But you look at, is there a track record? So is there a track record of, look, they've done 10 of these deals, they always need the management team, or look, this is going to be a totally new region for us or a totally new office office or a totally new service offering or a new, we're in commercial hardscape and this is residential. I mean, whatever the things are, in which case they're going to need that team to lead that division or that office or that practice or whatever. And that helps build camaraderie and understanding of future, leadership potential for them. I also see a lot of times when, if it's a really small business, say it's a 30, 40, 50, 60 person company, and they're merging into a couple 100, 300, 400 person company. If you've got some high flyers that maybe were, I'll put in air quotes, too good to be at a 50 or 60 person company, they are excited for the potential to get inside of a 3, 4, 500 person company and what that opportunity provides them, because they understand there's some cap as to how much they can make inside of a 50 person company. But inside of a 300 person company, now there's new roles, new titles, new leadership roles. I got, my limit, my sky just got moved upwards. And so it gives me more potential. Those people always very excited.
Correct. No, and I've seen it where owners, as part of a transaction, have a 12 or 24 month guaranteed contract for certain key employees to help with the transition, not only for the business and their own earnout, but also making sure that people are there to help them through that process. And so, have you seen? So that earnout concept, right, has been around for years. And for people who don't understand that, there's two types of transactions in my mind. Either it's a clean cut and you get all your cash and you're done, you walk out the door. Or a lot of investors or a lot of strategics look at this earnout where you get a lump sum up front, and then based on metrics, if it's retention of clients, sales numbers, goals, there is this earnout based on those agreed upon numbers to, again, de-risk the buyer from the transaction, right? And so help us understand the two worlds. And is there any difference in terms of how you approach a sell when you look at those type of, I would say, the transaction of those two lenses?
Yeah, and I would throw in 1/3, which is a third component, which could go in either of those two buckets. So it could be a factor under either of the two buckets, which is maybe I also roll some equity. Maybe I've sold 90% or 80% or 95%, and I'm keeping 5% of whatever the new entity is, whether that's a roll up, a private equity, a strategic, or just Tommy buying the business and I'm going to be a 5% owner and on the board of advisors or something. Mm-hmm. So that's the only other piece I'd throw in. And when you talk about earnout, I think the keys are making sure it's clearly defined up front. I don't like net income or EBITDA targets because the seller has almost no control over what's sort of below the line. Typically like revenue targets, retention targets, things that they can have some impact on, retention of people or clients, and revenue, or maybe if it's a product-based business, maybe it's gross margin-based, but anything below the line, you can't control if they hire 10 extra people or pay year-end bonuses to everybody on the staff or whatever. Those things just don't work.
Yeah, no, and I think talking to advisors and helping them understand what are those, I would say, games that can be played, right? Or maybe you ran your business really efficient and they come in and they have to hire 10 more people because they just don't know. That's not on you. That's on them for not being able to run an efficient business. So help us understand then, as you're helping a seller that's 3 to 5 years out, like what are some 2 or 3 things that you're thinking about besides the conversation, where let's say we get past the emotional piece and say, yes, we're going to move forward, we're going to sell this business. What are 2 or 3 strategic things that the mind shift now? So in the tax world, right, we're both tax guys. We're always trying to make sure our tax liability is the lowest possible from year to year, maybe defer as much of the income to future years because that's just good sound policy. Going from that mindset now to trying to optimize the balance sheet, the P&L for a transaction, help people understand the mindset shift in that scenario.
Yep. So it's a few things. I don't know if I can just boil it down to 2 or 3, but I'll try. I would say one for sure is to get the person thinking longer term value creation. You can't stop investing in the business. You can't stop bringing in new business. You can't stop those things. So almost want to work harder those final few years, right? Rather than coasting through. You've got to pick up the speed. You've got to pick up more new clients. Buyers want to see an upward trend. They want to see growth of 8, 10, 12%, 2 or 3 years in a row organically. They don't want to see a flat business or a declining business. So those things are really critical. And sometimes sellers just aren't thinking about that. The other thing I would say is to build the leadership team. Make sure they have the key people. And also, the person that you've thought was a bad performer for years, you need to get rid of them now. Don't make it the buyer's problem. Get somebody in place today to help you build the business over the next few years. So getting the right people in the right seats, the old, Jim Collins, good to great, but do it immediately. People think, oh, I'll just push this off to the buyer. It'll be their problem. That's a really bad answer. The buyer hates that. And then the other thing I would say is thinking about how to compartmentalize the business financially. So it's things like, do we have the right, depending on who you might sell to, if you're going to sell to a strategic or a PE, I mean, if you're going to sell to Tommy and me, maybe not, right? You might be a smaller business, but if you're 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 million, 100 million in revenue, they're going to want to dig in on individual client profitability, service line profitability. So if you don't have that data, you need to get better data. That means maybe upgrading to an ERP. Maybe you're using QuickBooks today. Maybe you need to upgrade to Sage Intacct or something else. Maybe it means you need to upgrade who your financial advisors are. Maybe you have a bookkeeper today. Maybe you need a part-time CFO. It could also mean, depending on what space you're in and who the buyer is, maybe you don't have any sort of outside audit today. Maybe if you're a $50 million company, for instance, and you're going to sell to somebody that's a strategic or somebody fairly large, you need to start thinking about, do I need to get audited financials 2, 3, 4 years in advance? And we've had clients that has made a multiple $1 million plus increase in their sales price over a few year period by doing that, getting financial assurance. And then you mentioned the quality of earnings. Certainly, I think for people who are trying to understand the value of their business and where it's headed, looking at, especially if they don't have the internal resources to do P&Ls by service line and all the different categories and really drill down to that level, getting sell side quality of earnings reports would be really critical to make sure that they understand just what their business is doing and what a buyer is going to be looking at.
Yeah. No, those are all key points, right? Of buyers, and think about putting yourself in the buyer's shoe. Why would you want to buy uncertainty and if there's toxic people in the environment, or the earnings just aren't there, right? They make the earnings look good on paper, but they're actually not there. I think people, I've seen when people optimize businesses in multiple ways, right? They look at it from the revenue side and EBITDA and multiples and saying, let's make sure every dollar we spend during this time frame of preparing for an exit should have a multiple expectation towards it, right? So every dollar, and not just, so cut costs where aren't necessary, but also spend the money, to your point, on the systems that will help the transition to a new buyer. But the part that that people sometimes forget is, don't wait to be asked the question. Like, prepare for it. Prepare for every single question that and they're going to get into every component, and you can't hide anything. And there's also these representations and warranties that when you're going through a deal, they're going to ask you these very broad questions of like, do you know of any issues? And if you say no, you're gonna, and they come out in, if it comes out in discovery, then you're gonna definitely be losing a lot of money, a lot of value. And so there's the financial piece that impacts your valuation, but there's also the other things of just keeping your house in clean order. And one of the things I did back in my day was we did this Nexus study for a lot of multi-state operating clients, and said, let's get your compliance for all these states. If it's sales and use tax, if you're selling products, or just income tax, let's make sure we have all those things, exposures all cleaned up, so that when someone's buying your book, you say, we've already looked at that process. Here is the report. We use this external advisor, and we've already made sure that everything's clean. So you want almost like, have you ever seen like Eminem back in the 8 Mile movie, where he starts off his rant and he gives up all the excuses why someone would tear him down? He throws it out there, and then the other guy goes, you just killed my whole rap. I can't come after you because you've already told me everything that I needed to know about you and all the bad things that might come out. And let's be honest, like, this is life. Things happen in businesses, and if you just articulate to them why it happened, most people will say, okay, that makes sense. But the minute that trust is broken because you're hiding something, or the thought of hiding, that value of your business is going to drop multiples, regardless of what your EBITDA is, right? And so definitely on the sell side, think about that piece of it. So those are the things I agree. And then the ERP system, right? Looking at those systems, I would say be careful not to just jump into a new project and spend millions and millions of dollars.
Nope.
But think about those conversions for the buyers when they look at that. And then we spent a lot of time on the sales side, and I think it's important for people to understand that there's a lot of things that go on prior to even selling a business. But you've represented buyers, and so what are buyers telling you when you're looking at a strategic or at a target company? What are things that is in their mind that will help a seller think about positioning their business for a transaction?
Yes. So I think the biggest thing for sure is a track record of consistent growth. It makes buyers a lot less nervous when you've got this sort of, oh, it's up 10%, it was down 6%, it's up 15%, it's down 9%. Buyers are like, well, which year am I buying? Am I buying the year that's going up 15% or the year it goes down 9%, right? And that's the biggest thing for sure is consistency along a growth pattern makes it much easier for buyers to make decisions. The second sort of big thing is how many clients do they have or customers or whatever, and is there somebody who's a really big percentage? If you're buying a $5 million business or a $100 million business, if you've got somebody that's 10, 15, 20% of that business, it starts to get nerve-wracking for a buyer because they think that's a really big number, which everybody loves big clients until you have to buy them or sell them, and then it's not that much fun. Those things are by far the top two things that become problems really quickly. Those are easy things. You might find other nuances in a deal, somebody's attitude, the leadership team, whatever, but those two things will kill transactions before we even get to an LOI or right after an LOI as fast as I can ever see them.
Yeah. And so on the buyer side, when they look at that revenue consistently going up and to the right, so obviously there might be dips here and there, are they more when they dig in on those numbers, regardless of the numbers look good? Let's say your annual growth is 10% year over year. Are they still digging in to see how was that money or how was that revenue generated? Was it in processes that were in place? Was it key individuals? Was it just happened to be, hey, you know what? We're going through a cycle now where M&A is really hot, and that happened in 04 and 05 where the practice that you were buying, the guy was like, hey, I'm making more money on the M&A side, but guess what? 06, 07 hits, and guess what? M&A dries up, right? Yeah. And so when buyers are digging into those numbers and those growth, they don't sit there and say, oh, that looks good, thank you very much, and then move on. They're digging in. What are they digging into to understand how the business works?
Yeah, so they're digging in. So I guess it's a yes, no. So if there's these big up and down hills, it's very likely to be the price is way down. We're dropping this price significantly, or we're out, right? We're not buying. When it's going up like this, there's nothing usually that they'll find in the trends when they dig in that's going to make them say no. What they're interested in is, what are you doing that you're doing really well that I make sure I don't screw up after the transaction? That's what they're, right? Like, oh, Billy or Susie killing it. Our website and SEO, we've somehow found the synergy and, home construction that gets us SEO #1 in the Chicago market. And so we're always at the top. Don't cut that spend. We've been spending $10,000 a month. I know that sounds like a lot, but that's generating all our leads. Whatever those things are, that is what they're doing. They're doing it not to find a reason not to do the deal. They're doing it to make sure that they understand. Don't screw it up after the deal. And what are you doing that's so cool to generate this? That how do I apply that to the other business I already own?
Yeah, and you read my mind before I even got there. So if you're the seller and you have this secret sauce that the buyer could easily plug and play into their own business, that's gonna create that value, you need to make sure that is articulated and that there's a premium for that component of the business, right? And so we have to be careful like that. We just don't say, all right, our EBITDA is X and we're going to throw a 8 times multiple. We're going to sell our business for 8X. It's really looking at buying our system and our processes is going to help their business, and say, how do you articulate that to a buyer if you're a seller? Because buyers aren't going to say anything about that. They're going to sit there and say, oh, this is great, we want to buy you. But as a seller, you need to think about your business, again, back to that 3 years out of an exit, understanding your business and who your business is and where the value is, because each component of your business has levers that will either decrease or increase that exit price. So as we kind of wrap up here, John, I really wanted to think about the past 10 years. A lot of these baby boomers are really transitioning businesses. Either they're selling it, or they're just locking up the business and closing the business and handing the keys over to the landlord. This market is, in terms of the wealth creation and shift of just these operating businesses that are out there, like, help us understand where we are in this life cycle of, the Great Recession, I would say 06, 07, those were different times. Financing was different than it is today. And I don't know if rates are going to go back down. And so how are people down the sell side that are in those 65, 70, age, thinking like, okay, I think it's time to really sell this business. Are there buyers out there that they should be, talking to? Are there buyers drying up? Like, what's happening in the market? I think was a pulse of what's happening in terms of, from a buyer's perspective. From a seller's perspective, are there buyers hungry to be buying businesses, and where can people go?
There are definitely a large amount of buyers. The thing that has changed, your point about interest rates, dead on, certainly totally different interest rates, which if you're buying a business less than 5, 6, 7 million does impact the price, because that person usually looks like Tommy and me, and they're leaving some sort of theoretical job, or they sold a business, but they didn't have enough to retire forever. So they're getting back in the game, and they're going to go get some debt to do the deal. And that debt is, significantly different than it was, 3, 4, 5 years ago, all the way back to 2008, 9, 10. What I would say, though, is that the other side of that coin is that the buyer profile for even those smaller businesses has changed. There is now significantly less businesses that are north of 10 to 50 million than there were 20 years ago. So what's happening is private equity, buys a large landscaper that's doing 100 million, doesn't really matter the number. And before, they used to do add-ons that were 20, 30, 40, 50, 70 million. Now there's less of those. So because they've done some consolidation over the last 20 years in various industries, so they're coming down and they're grabbing businesses for 5 million, 7 million, 3 million that are add-ons, and they're doing a whole bunch of them. And they found that those people didn't find that the transaction, although small, the efficiency gains can be huge, and the multiple they're paying is so much less than what they're going to be worth inside the $100 million business that they're seeing the rate arbitrage. And so where private equity may have had a bad name 30 plus years ago, it's got a great name, at least in the world that I live in on a daily basis, compared to what it did 30 plus years ago. And they still keep intact management teams. The performance is strong, and they're coming down. And so where maybe me and you 20 years ago were the buyer profile, now we have to deal with private equity roll-ups. They're not coming down and buying their first acquisition in the landscaping is not a $5 million business, right? But it's their 5th or 6th in a roll-up strategy, and they're coming way down.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think for people in this podcast listening to this, the idea of these roll-ups, and what it really just means is that private equity is taking a pool of money from investors who are looking to just deploy capital into the market. And so you have these people who aggregate all this money and go buy businesses. So let's say they buy, to your point, landscape business. They buy a $50 million business. And what the private equity does now is saying, okay, we have this business that's $50 million in value. Let's go now find similar businesses that have the same type of metrics, the same type of offerings, maybe different offerings, because now you're able to put more offerings out there, but take similar businesses and then adding them up. And so you're just, I think, adding pieces to this bigger, make it a bigger pie, because now you're getting into this area of institutional buyers who will pay a premium for something that's been built up. So a seller, right, if you're preparing to sell your business, that may be a $3 to $5 million acquisition for one of these organizations. You have to think about, again, back to you said this earlier, you have to understand who the buyer is. And if the buyer is a private equity looking to add this on, that's a different conversation, different valuation, because now you're helping them take that and make it a bigger multiple for their business. And so, again, thinking about this and doing it on your own, I would say I would caution you, talk to advisors who've been there. I think people look at the conversation I've had, John, with families is why do I need you to help me through this process? And you brought up a good point where it's like if you spend some of these dollars and get ahead of some of these questions or just understanding what the market is, you will come out so much more ahead. Yeah, you might pay someone a percentage, 1% of the transaction fee for their advisory services, but they might get you an extra $10 million in your pocket, right? And you might pay, $150,000 to make another $10 million. I think anyone would take that bet any day, right? And so back to just being mindful that working with people that have done this and continue to do this, not only bring the experience of other transactions to the table, but they also see what the current market value is of what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And when you work with top tier advisory people like yourself, John, your firm, or me on the family office side, we've seen so many different deals that we know, okay, you can push there. Over here, don't push there. Give this up, because that, in the grand scheme of things, is no value. Go after this, maybe give here a little bit. And so those are the things I would say when you're looking at selling or buying, or any time you're doing a transaction, talk to someone that's been doing it for years. And I think for you too, right? You've emotionally gone through that yourself. So I think you bring a different lens of empathy to the equation. You're not just another advisor. And so I would say any parting thoughts. John, again, I appreciate you getting on the podcast. Again, we've known each other for many, many years. Again, you have a pool table in your house that I need to come get one day. But any parting, wisdom for people that are, contemplating a transaction?
I think it's never too early to start. If you're starting a business today, think about what your exit is. That doesn't mean you're going to sell tomorrow, but you got to start early thinking about it, because you might build the business significantly different if you're going to do a transaction in 3 years or 23 years. You got a lot more time. You got different patience. You can take smaller bets, those sorts of things. I think the other is just realize that it's an emotional process, back to the beginning of this discussion, and having somebody alongside you. Actually, Tommy, going back to your comment about the ROI, I find that if people do their own deals, now maybe not at a $500,000 transaction, but at a $5 million, $10 million, $15 million, or much larger transaction, if the owner tries to do it themselves, maybe they leave money on the table, but they certainly have a lot more trouble actually getting the deal done, because the buyer is pretty intelligent and has an army and a team, and they're expecting the person on the other side to have done a bunch of transactions that they're talking with. And when they talk to the seller, they're like, why are we having this discussion? I don't even understand why this is a thing. And it becomes actually an impediment to get the deal done.
Yeah. Because to your point, if that's how if let's say you want to stay on as management to help this transition, this is how you're going to run the business after the transaction's done, right? And so that's very key, right? Because there's people, again, let's remove the barriers. Let's make this transaction as easy as possible. And if you're trying to save a couple of bucks, you rather have a percentage of something versus 100% of nothing, right? And let's make sure that we think through that. And so, John, again, it's been fun. I'm glad you're on the podcast to kind of just, again, help people who are going through transitions in their businesses and their life. And again, it is emotional, but you bring in the right team of advisors that sometimes I would say you need them from outside the firm. You need someone from outside the management team to really look at this and help you through this process, because it is emotional, but we would help, again, put those guardrails up and help you through the process and focus, almost putting blinders on as horses and just focusing on the transaction. But again, John, it's been fun. I appreciate you jumping on.
Thanks, Tommy. Really appreciate it.